Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster, where all of a sudden there's this mysterious monorail station, and I wish I had a good excuse for not recording this, but frankly I don't really. It actually took upwards of an hour to build the roof of this thing alone, and it was a very embarrassing turn of events where I just kept building stuff and removing it, and was even live streaming it, and that was horribly painful. Basically the most important point is that it's here, and it gives us a pretty good head start into the rest of this video, because many of the things which I'm making in this video are just kind of all over the place. There are many little things that still needed to be done to actually finish the German area, and that's what I'll be doing in this video. Everything from the foliage to the buildings to the terraces to the little monorail should be finished after this video, except for very small things, including the cars on the monorail, and the cars on the car ride, and the station of the coaster, which are things that I am just procrastinating on because I don't think I can really do them yet, or I just don't want to do them yet. Either way, I want to move into some other things pretty quickly, especially with the deadline coming up quite closely, and I hugged some deadlines very tightly with some earlier projects. Alfheim was stressful, and Grizzly Valley turned out to be pretty stressful, so yeah, I at least like to pretend that that's not gonna happen this time around. Anyway, just doing a little bit of foliage underneath the station, which you can't practically go really wrong with. Only thing that you can really go wrong with is placing too much foliage, like on the inside of buildings or inside caves and things like that. I do want to keep my foliage underneath buildings and under rocks quite simple, just a bit of very simple grass and mossy looking textures, no flowers or anything like that, because obviously I do want to get those things in the places that actually get some sunlight. And yeah, this little plaza was also still looking a little bit empty, so I wanted to add some flowers to that. I am trying with all my might to not go overboard with the flowers. Even though I've already gone a bit overboard with them, I still want to leave some areas with just trees and grass, and as you can see, some areas with just open grass as well, not to make everything look too flowery, if that makes any sense. Which is not just because a theme park with just flowers everywhere wouldn't make too much sense, it also just kind of helps to leave some areas open, and especially the little area inside the plaza seemed like a very good place to leave with a bit more open grass. And the little grass patch underneath the monorail next to the restaurant I wanted to keep open, just to sort of keep that sight line of the restaurant quite clear, make it really like the restaurant is kind of looming over a little hill instead of being sort of overarched by all of these trees. And fences and paths are still a bit of an annoying thing, so this is a bit of a crooked fence over here, just quickly built on top of the hill, just to at least give some sort of a queue idea. I didn't want to quite make the queue out of queue pieces at the time, because it's pretty much impossible to hook those up. Well, it is impossible to hook those up to path pieces without any problems, but in the end I'm not really sure how well that red texture worked out, so I'll probably revert that back to the stone texture of regular paths. Now, next thing that I wanted to do is actually work on this little balloon ride here, since it didn't really have any kind of scenery around it, and the entrance of it was still one big yellow gate, and I don't really like yellow gates, so that needed to be covered up. But then again, this thing that's supposed to cover it up is quite bulky and a bit of an eyesore in its own right, so I at least wanted to add all sorts of stuff around it to make it look a little bit less bad. It still probably looks bad in the end, but yeah, if something looks bad, you can always just keep adding stuff onto it until you can't really tell if it's bad anymore or if it's just one big mess of detail. Now, in an attempt to actually make it look a bit better, and in a serious way, also add a bit of realism to the ride, because there wasn't really any kind of operator booth for it yet, not that I saw one, so I wanted to add a little house next to it, which is where the ride operator could, possibly, if there were such a thing, sit and operate the ride with its little window to have an overview of the ride. And that's why I built this little house, but at the same time it also helps to make the entrance gates not seem so out of nowhere and seem so breaking the entire surrounding. It's a very simple house with just a very similar style to what I've had before. It just kind of helps to bring out the entrance a bit more, and for the realism of the ride. It's not that much otherwise. Just a little bit more experimentation with like different roof pieces. I do quite like adding all of these different trims on the sides of the roof pieces, just to not make them so simple, and actually make them look more like proper roof pieces. So that's why I wanted to add some of those door pieces around the sides of the roof, give it that little trim around it. And what I also wanted to do is actually make a fence. What's like the one thing that I'm really happy with as a result of me building that monorail station and taking 2 hours to do so, is that I very accidentally came across a trick to make new fences, which are quite simple. It's just a bunch of signs sunken into whatever kind of border you want to use, but it is quite nice. It does have a bit of a fence-like texture to it. It's not the best looking fence, but the most important thing is that it uses some slightly different colors, different textures and different shapes than many of the fences, which are made out of the much more common pieces in the game. And yeah, this fence is more or less used to get a bit more variety into the fences. It's just not the best looking fence, but hopefully it'll make the other fences look a little bit less repetitive. It also kind of helps to cover up that very standard sort of themeless fence of the ride itself, because the ride does come with a sort of very generic fence, which doesn't really make it fit into the very rustic look of the park in general, so it kind of helps to cover up that ugly fence in favor of a little bit, well, more rustic fence at least. And the same goes for all of the details around it. There was still quite a bit of space around here, and that space wanted to be filled with a couple of planters, a couple of benches, and some new lanterns. Again, for a bit of variety on it as well. And I think it was Brandon who actually had the idea to take this round thing that I used as planters before and actually use it as a litter bin by not really putting any plants in it, which actually works quite well. So I figured I'd want to have some litter bins around there as well. I will definitely fill in the rest of the park with litter bins too. It's just something that I didn't really do up to this point, because I still kind of want to figure out how to best make litter bins actually look like litter bins. But that's something to worry about at some point in the future. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to do is make this house over here, which isn't really anything. It's just a bit of decoration, but it kind of helps to transition from the main street into the transition into another area. Because just ending it with this one big building over here just seemed like a very sudden sort of stop of the main street facades there. And this building also doesn't really look too great if you look from this perspective, so I kind of wanted something that could sort of transition from the main street into what is basically going to be a more open area without any buildings. And one lower building that sort of goes on for a little bit longer and has this open place underneath it with a bunch of scenery next to the path seemed like a pretty good shape to sort of get that going, and also a nice way to get some extra scenery in around the paths. And what is next to this going to be a small path to the German area? What? To the Dutch area, which I want to have right around here on the corner at some point in the future. That aside though, it is pretty much a building like any of the other ones so far. Simple stucco walls, a bit of wooden framework on it, and on top of that a roof made out of a ton of doors, which I do have to say I would want to use this roof for the Dutch and the Scandinavian area as well for texture reasons, since they are, well, generally cautious with a lot of buildings that have red tiled roofs. The only issue with that is that I am really beginning to feel very terrified, really, at the prospect of the frame rates that this is probably going to give at some point in the future. And though it may not look like it, I am at least trying to keep my polys as low as I can, and using this roof as little as I can is one part in that. So I mostly want to use it in the most visible buildings, in the most visible places, which is why I wanted to use it in here, but still I don't want to use it quite too often. We'll see how the frame rate is going to end up anyway. That's probably a worry for later, to be quite honest. So down here at the bottom, I'm just decorating it with a bunch of wooden posts, some windows, and some simple timber stuff. I wanted to keep this open and actually add some scenery in there, which isn't even my idea. I should mention that this is actually largely modeled after some buildings in Tripsdrill, which are kind of like showcase buildings of miniatures and scenery that's in them. And while I don't really have any kind of puppets or anything to really turn this into some sort of interactive thing on the side of the path, it does help to get some extra scenery in and transition from the main street, so I still wanted to make something a bit similar to those buildings. And this is what it ended up becoming, and it's also a really good way to just get an excuse to add all sorts of detail, because it is a very simple building. It's really not that interesting on its own, and just a good way to add all sorts of scenery in and around it to at least make it look much more interesting than it really is in the end. Same goes for much of the ivy here. I'd have to say that's kind of a tip that I would give, but sort of want to be quiet about, because they're the kind of tips that are more about how to be lazy and how to appear good without actually being that good, I would almost reckon. Just covering any kind of empty side of a building, or a side of a building which you don't really know what to do with ivy, if that sort of fits the theme, is actually a really easy and wonderful way to make things look a little bit better. It's kind of like putting trees in front of the building that you don't really like that much, or just placing restaurants everywhere, which is something that I'll get to later in this video. Over here I was struggling with the path system for a very long time, so I decided to screw that and skip forward in time. And the moment I stopped recording that, like, I got the path layout done at once, which was a bit strange. But yeah, moving on. I wanted one more addition to the park, and I didn't even come up with it myself. I really have to credit a comment for this, and I forgot who commented it, so if you were that person, I am very sorry about forgetting your name. But somebody actually left a comment and said that I should add a May tree to this park, and I have to admit I completely forgot about it, and it's a really great idea. They're basically the trees that many European cultures they raise up, well, guess in what month, for some reason. I'm not actually entirely sure what the reason is, but I assume it has something to do with, well, farming, because May is like the beginning of summer anyway. But yeah, it's a very common thing, especially in Bavaria and some alpine countries. So I wanted to get a May tree in, and it's quite simple as well, just one big wooden paw with on the top of it what's left of the tree, and a bit of a like decoration. They really have varying decorations, and there are all sorts of May trees, but I wanted to go for quite a simple one, since it really seemed like the most feasible thing to do here. Now, alongside the flat ride here, I had a lot of empty space, and I didn't really have any kind of idea what to do with it. For a while I thought of just making it forest, but that's something that I just wanted to avoid, because it would seem like a lot of wasted space. I was thinking about buildings and extending the main street all the way into this here, but realistically that is just way too many buildings for such a small park. And almost all of the buildings that I do build, I do want to make sure that they have some kind of function. And having a huge Disney-style main street would definitely not fit in this kind of park, so that was out of the question. And yeah, one last resort kind of thing that I was thinking of was to build just another small restaurant over here. Not really a full-fledged restaurant, but just a small sort of snack corner with a terrace on the outside. And the reason that I wouldn't... well, that I was hesitating to actually do so is that this would be the third restaurant in what is quite a small park, and I really felt like 2 would be about the magical number for the size of this area, and this is quite close to the other restaurants as well. So it is a little bit dense, but it is in the end what I thought would look best for this flat ride and for this part of the park, and that's why I decided to just put a little snack shop in there, or a shack, I suppose it is, and just have some terraces on either side. One is raised, just to kind of give a bit more sort of playful, almost terraforming height difference into the area, because if that were the case, I was very afraid that this would turn out to be a very sort of flat, large stretch of paths and flat rides, and that's what I wanted to avoid. And one side of the terrace is just a regular sort of very small terrace, which is just very close to the ground. That's basically it. And the shack itself is quite simple as well. Just a very standard sort of roof structure here. with a rectangular little shack underneath it, which I don't think, yeah, I'm not gonna actually add a functioning restaurant on the bottom of it, which in hindsight, maybe I do want to do. I'm still not 100% sure, because it does kind of make things a bit of a hassle, but I can do it. There isn't anything sticking through the building, and technically speaking, even though there are already functioning restaurants in-game quite close to it, I might actually make this functional at some point in the future. Right now though, it is just going to be a bit of a decoration, because in the end it is always kind of like a puzzle to figure out how to put everything together if you do put a store inside of it, because you'll have to have a path connect to it, and you can't have any walls or anything go through it, and not having anything inside of this does make it possible to basically, well, come up with the entire look of the thing, except instead of, you know, getting a store of one tile and having to build around that. So I was quite happy to not have to deal with the store here, but I might actually place one at some point in the future. In any case, I figured I would have some cosmic cow signs on top of it. Not to have clickbait for the people in the park who think that this is a cosmic cow store, but because it seemed like the most fitting kind of thing. It isn't exactly a big restaurant, just a very small corner where you could get some ice cream or something like that. And Cosmic Cow with their milkshakes seem to be about the next best thing there. I'll definitely be adding some extra signs and stuff at some point in the future. This was just kind of a placeholder of that's what I kind of want to do with this in the future. I may actually have decided to change that around a bit. Now, skipping more of that time lapse for a little more interesting segment, I quickly wanted to make the terrace over here out of some pieces which I've already made. Especially at this point, you do kind of get to notice how much easier it is if you save everything that you're using as a separate building. Like, the more things you've already made in the park, the more things you can just copy over from other sections of the park. So I just very quickly took the fence from the playground here, put all of the tables and parasols and chairs that I made earlier in there, one planter, and that is basically the terrace finished in a very small amount of time. So it really does come in handy. It can be a bit of an annoying thing to do very early on in a map, but especially later on, if you've got all these things saved, it becomes a lot easier. Definitely one of the reasons why I'm very much looking forward to Alpha 3 as well, with the blueprint sharing function, which will make the lives of just about everybody a lot easier. But I'm not sure if this is really the best time to talk about my hype for Alpha 3. Next thing that I wanted to do here is add some flowers, because I didn't have enough flowers in the park yet, and I love myself some flowers. What I really didn't have enough in the park yet is actually arranged flowers that sort of are arranged in a kind of decorative way. Many of the flowers are just put beside the paths and rides in a more random fashion, just all sort of stuck together. But I didn't really have any kind of flower arrangements as you would see them in larger parks like Disney, especially Epcot does it a lot. And while I certainly didn't want to do it on the scale of Disney, this is going to be the entrance into what is going to be the Scandinavian area, so it is quite a significant point of the path system. So I wanted to decorate it quite a bit, add all sorts of flowers and decorations around it, make sure it also looks quite a bit significant. And it did sort of turn this plaza over here into a very open area, especially with having nothing in the middle of this grassy section. I ended up putting a well over here, which I forgot the word for earlier on, but I got it, no worries, I saw your comments. Yeah, I wanted to place a well over here. In the end, it did turn out to make this plaza quite open. It's not very foresty anymore, but we'll just see if that ends up being a good thing or a bad thing once I get into the rest of the area. Yes, so it's time for that part of the video again, and there is plenty to talk about here since I'm not really sure about my future plans for this park. One of the issues is that I actually managed to fill up a little bit more space than I was planning to, relative to what my park size actually is that I started with, which I'm gonna have to, well, chalk up to my terrible drawing again. But this means that there isn't really much space for the Scandinavian area right now, since this is, well, just a very, very crammed, sort of stretched out rectangle that I still have left over here. So I might just extend it a little bit into this direction, make it a little bit larger, because I do still plan to make an RMC coaster over here. which again I'm not really sure how well that's going to work out, since I will have to use the B&M track for it. Would have actually liked to use the Zero track for it instead, since the Zero track is a bit more similar to an RMC track, but you can't do inversions with it. So what's an RMC without inversions? Technically you can do inversions with it, but it's gonna, well, require a lot of magic tricks to actually get it to do all of the hang time things that RMC coasters do, so yeah, I'm gonna end up using a B&M for that. Still have to figure out how I'm going to do that entire side of the park. And there's also going to be the Dutch section with what is sadly going to be a B&M family invert, since there is still not a Vekoma invert in this game. Just giving out some wink wink nudge nudge there. But you know, gotta work with what we actually have. Wanna have a B&M family invert in here and see how that kind of works its way around that area. There's still plenty of room around here, especially for the more widely set up areas that I do plan to make those parts of the park, since they are a bit more new. And the German section is kind of a bit of a forest. I don't want to show it off too much yet, but this is basically what it looks like. I'm actually quite happy with how it all sort of came together. One of the biggest issues, or one of the biggest like obstacles that I felt I was really afraid of, was it not really fitting together and just ending up being this incoherent mess that sort of looked good on paper but doesn't really in real life. But I'm quite happy with how it overall transitions into the different areas, and this is basically how it looks for every part of the park. One thing that is still a little bit sketchy is the station, which is still a work in progress. And what I also still have to do is the cars for the monorail and the car ride. I actually got some designs sent to me, so thank you for that. I will have to figure out how I'm going to do that, but it's something which I'm procrastinating on. I'll get that done at some point in the future. But first, I need to figure out how to do these areas in this shape and in this time, because there isn't really that much time left for Alpha 3, which is at once a great thing because I'm looking forward to it, and on the other hand, I do want to get this park done before that time arrives. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope to see you guys next time, in which I'll attempt to make an RMC coaster, and we'll see how that goes. Thank you guys for watching.